February 1944. The Eastern Front was no longer the sweeping battlefield of triumph it had been in 1941. Now, it was a bloody, grinding retreat. Army Group South, commanded by Field Marshal Erich von Manstein, was clinging desperately to the Dnieper Bend in Ukraine, convinced that strategic elasticity, the ability to trade space for time, was the only way to save his command. But Hitler, obsessed with holding symbolic territory and strategic cities, repeatedly forbade retreat. This fundamental conflict between military reality and ideological dogma set the stage for one of the most brutal and strategically complex encirclement battles of the war, the Korsun-Cherkassy Cauldron. Two German corps, 11 and 42, totaling approximately 60,000 men, were left dangerously exposed on a bulge in the line, trapped between the Dnieper and the relentless Soviet advance. They were holding an untenable position solely because the Führer decreed it so. What followed was a battle against not just the Soviet army, but against the elements, against the mud, against command paralysis, and ultimately, a brutal fight for survival in a cauldron that threatened to consume every last man. By the start of 1944, the Soviet Red Army had regained the strategic initiative and was focused on reclaiming the entirety of the Ukraine. Manstein's forces were exhausted and stretched thin, but the 11th and 42nd Army Corps were anchored dangerously on a large salient near the cities of Cherkassy and Korsun. This bulge was a strategic temptation that the Stavka, Soviet High Command, could not ignore. The Soviet plan, devised by Marshal Georgy Zhukov and others, was a classic double envelopment, or hammer and anvil maneuver, designed to replicate the success of Stalingrad. The objective was to cut the base of the salient using two powerful mobile thrusts from the first Ukrainian front, under Vatutin, and the second Ukrainian front, under Konev. The plan hinged on speed, massive concentration of tanks, specifically the powerful new T-34/85s, and absolute operational secrecy. The German commands were aware of the danger, but the order to withdraw to a safer, straight-line position, the Panther-Wotan line, was repeatedly denied by Hitler, who feared the political ramifications of abandoning territory. This command paralysis was the first fatal flaw that allowed the Soviet hammer to strike. The Soviet offensive began on January 24, 1944. The northern pincer, led by the 1st Ukrainian Front, struck first. The German lines, manned by exhausted infantry and few reserves, buckled immediately. 4 days later, on January 28th, the southern pincer from the 2nd Ukrainian Front, Konev, slammed into the German defenses. The speed of the Soviet armored thrusts, particularly the 5th Guards Tank Army, was astonishing. The two spearheads met near the village of Zvenigorodka. In a matter of 4 days, the pocket was sealed. Trapped inside the newly formed Korsun pocket, the kettle, were approximately 6 divisions, including the highly effective SS Panzer Grenadier Division, Viking, and the 5th SS Volunteer Sturm Brigade Wallonian, totaling around 60,000 to 65,000 soldiers, plus thousands of auxiliary and support personnel. The immediate shock was palpable. Unlike the slow collapse at Stalingrad, this encirclement was brutally fast, catching the German forces deeply entrenched and fully equipped, creating a massive logistical and human disaster overnight. The Kessel was initially quite large, giving the trapped forces a brief moment to consolidate, but the Soviet forces immediately began the systematic compression of the pocket. The political consequences of this strategic error were immense, and Manstein immediately began the process of fighting his own command, Hitler, to authorize a breakout. Just as the tactical situation reached its climax, the most formidable, non-combatant general entered the fray. General Schlamm, General Mud. February in the Ukraine meant the onset of the Rasputitsa, the season of thaw and impassable mud. The ground, saturated by melting snow and rain, turned into a bottomless, sticky quagmire. This element was both a curse and a strange temporary blessing. Curse. The mud immediately crippled all attempts by the relief forces, Huba's 3rd Panzer Corps, to reach the pocket with any speed. Tanks and trucks became instantly bogged down, limiting movement to a crawl. Blessing. The mud also severely hampered the Soviet attempt to rapidly compress and destroy the pocket. Soviet armor often struggled as much as the German tanks, turning the roads into rivers of viscous sludge. Inside the Kessel, the mud was an absolute logistical nightmare. Artillery pieces, heavy vehicles, and even supply wagons had to be abandoned or pulled by horses and sheer human effort. The mud dictated the terms of the engagement, reducing the battle to a grim, infantry-level struggle for every kilometer. The German troops were now fighting on 2 fronts, the relentless Soviet armor and the energy-sapping, equipment-destroying Ukrainian soil. This struggle against the elements transformed the engagement from a conventional encirclement into a primal battle for mobility. With all ground supply routes severed, the survival of the 60,000 trapped men hinged entirely on the Luftwaffe's ability to create an aerial lifeline. The attempt to supply Korsun was a desperate, chaotic echo of the disastrous Stalingrad airlift. Planes, mostly the reliable but vulnerable Ju-52 transport, flew into the pocket from airfields hundreds of kilometers away, running the gauntlet of Soviet air defenses and fighters. Conditions for the airlift were appalling. The airfields inside the Kessel were crude, muddy strips, constantly under Soviet artillery fire, making landing and takeoff a lethal gamble. The German supply planes often arrived carrying a fraction of the necessary materials, and crucially, they could not evacuate the thousands of wounded. The daily requirement for the encircled forces was approximately 150 to 200 tons. The maximum they ever received was rarely more than 80 tons, often less. Food, fuel, and especially ammunition, the 3 pillars of resistance, dwindled rapidly. The fuel shortage was critical. It meant that the German armor inside the Kessel was essentially immobilized, serving as fixed firing points rather than mobile counterattack forces. The failure of the airlift to meet demand made the breakout not just a necessity, but an inevitable, desperate gamble that had to be taken before all supplies ran out. The most critical battle during the first 2 weeks of the Kessel was fought not on the ground, but in the command bunkers between Field Marshal Erich von Manstein and Adolf Hitler. Manstein, the realistic and highly capable commander of Army Group South, immediately recognized the futility of holding the position and demanded authorization for an immediate breakout. Hitler, driven by ideology, political ego, and the fear of a perceived second Stalingrad, adamantly refused. He ordered the troops to hold the Kessel and await relief from the outside. This denial of reality was catastrophic. Every day the German forces remained trapped, the Soviet compression grew tighter, and the relief distance grew longer due to the mud. The ultimate compromise, a political obfuscation designed to satisfy Hitler while still allowing Manstein to save his troops, was the order for the relief force to establish contact with the Kessel, implicitly allowing a subsequent withdrawal breakout. This command delay, engineered solely to satisfy a non-military directive, cost the lives of thousands of soldiers. The episode highlights the destructive central role of Hitler's personal micromanagement in the tactical disasters on the Eastern Front. The trapped soldiers were not only fighting the Soviets and the mud, but fighting the ideological blindness of their own high command. Life inside the Korsun pocket quickly devolved into a grim struggle for survival. The compression meant the German lines were constantly shifting, shrinking the safe zones and bringing all positions under Soviet artillery range. The troops inside, a mix of elite SS Panzer Grenadiers, veteran Wehrmacht infantry, and rear echelon support, were exposed to non-stop shelling. The lack of fuel immobilized the tanks, and the limited supply of ammunition forced extreme conservation. The mud, compounded by the constant need for labor to build defensive positions and retrieve bogged-down vehicles, led to rapid exhaustion. Worse still was the situation for the wounded. With no capacity for evacuation, thousands of severely injured men were crammed into hastily converted field hospitals with rapidly diminishing medical supplies. The decision to break out became less a strategic choice and more a moral imperative to save the men, particularly the wounded, from certain death or capture. The psychological toll was immense. The men knew they were expendable pawns in a strategic game decided far above their pay grade. Yet their fighting discipline remained remarkably high, a testament to the quality of the junior leadership. The Kessel was a relentless meat grinder, shrinking hour by hour. While the trapped men inside the Kessel fought for space and survival, Field Marshal Manstein mobilized the relief effort, centered around the 3rd Panzer Corps under General Hermann Breith, replacing Hube. The relief force, a formidable punch composed of veteran Panzer and Panzer Grenadier divisions, including the 1st, 16th, and 17th Panzer divisions, and the powerful 1st SS Panzer Division, Leibstandarte SS Adolf Hitler, faced an opponent greater than the Soviet Army, General Schlamm. The distance to the Kessel was only about 70 kilometers, but the relentless Rasputitsa turned every track and road into an impassable morass. The deep, viscous mud severely limited the speed of the panzer divisions. Tanks, designed for fast maneuvers, were now bogged down constantly, requiring recovery vehicles, Bergepanzers, that themselves often got stuck. Fuel consumption skyrocketed, and the time required to move even short distances multiplied. Soviet counterattacks, heavily supported by artillery, compounded the problem, turning every advance into a costly, slow grind. The 3rd Panzer Corps fought bravely, closing the gap to a critical 30-kilometer distance. Crucially, the Soviet forces, recognizing the threat, shifted significant tank reserves to block the spearhead, forming an unyielding wall of T-34s and anti-tank guns. The relief attempt stalled, unable to punch through the final defensive layers to reach the exhausted troops in the Kessel. The troops inside watched their rescuers approach on the maps, only to see the movement cease. A profound psychological blow that sealed the decision to attempt an independent breakout. The final failure was a testament to the Soviet strategic choice to utilize the elements and maintain unyielding pressure, maximizing the impact of the Ukrainian winter thaw. With the relief forces stalled and supplies inside the Kessel virtually exhausted, ammunition stocks were down to a few rounds per gun, and food was gone. The time for the political game was over. General Wilhelm Stemmermann, the commander of the trapped forces, reported the catastrophic situation to Manstein. Manstein, circumventing Hitler's explicit orders to hold, issued the famous ambiguous command to the 3rd Panzer Corps: make contact with the encircled forces. This implicitly gave Stemmermann the moral and tactical latitude to conduct a withdrawal after contact was made. The decision was set. The breakout, codenamed Buffalo, would happen immediately, independent of the outer relief forces' success. The German forces were ordered to abandon all heavy equipment that could not be easily moved. Tanks, including Panzer IVs, Stug 3s, heavy artillery pieces, and thousands of trucks were destroyed with explosive charges to prevent their capture. This act of self-destruction was a grim psychological precursor to the desperate march ahead. The plan was simple: abandon the existing defensive line, form 2 massive columns, and march southwest, aiming for the village of Lysyanka, the agreed-upon rendezvous point, approximately 60 kilometers away. The troops were reorganized into cohesive Kampfgruppen, battle groups, with the SS Division Viking and other crack units forming the spearhead and rear guard. a grim acknowledgement that only disciplined infantry could survive the terrain and the enemy. The final preparation was a brutal triage. Only the most severely wounded who could fit onto sleds or light vehicles could be taken. The rest were often left behind in the hope of humane Soviet treatment, a moral decision that weighed heavily on the command. The night of February 16, 1944, marked the beginning of the Black March. Under the cover of a massive blizzard and darkness, the two German columns abandoned their positions and began their desperate eastward march. The speed of movement was dictated entirely by the Rasputitsa and human endurance. The troops, marching through the night, encountered not roads, but knee-deep, energy-sapping mud. The noise of the march was muffled by the blizzard and the sticky earth, allowing the German columns to initially achieve a degree of tactical surprise. However, the Soviet command quickly realized the nature of the withdrawal and reacted with ferocious intensity, focusing their artillery on the known escape corridor. The columns immediately came under a terrifying and continuous barrage of Soviet guns, including the devastating Katyusha rocket batteries. This barrage, combined with the extreme physical exertion, turned the retreat into a chaotic mass of struggling men. Discipline held primarily due to the veteran nature of the core fighting units and the leadership of the SS Division Viking, which fought brutal rearguard actions against the Soviet pursuit. The abandonment of heavy arms meant that the men had no effective counter-battery fire. They could only march and endure the constant, murderous shelling. The march became a grim procession of survival, where the weakest and most severely wounded fell into the mud, knowing they would be left behind. The most critical and devastating phase of the breakout occurred as the German columns approached the Gniloy Tikich River, the final major geographic obstacle before the Lysyanka rendezvous. The river, normally a small tributary, was swollen by the thaw into a fast-flowing, freezing barrier that was too wide to jump and too deep to wade easily. This bottleneck was where the Soviet command had set their final, deadly trap. Marshal Konev, anticipating the German move, deployed mechanized forces, but critically, he utilized Soviet cavalry divisions, especially the 5th Guards Cavalry Corps, and infantry to block the river crossings and drive the retreating columns into the water. As the Germans clustered at the makeshift crossing points, often only a few submerged tank hulls or hastily felled logs, they came under concentrated fire from all sides. The scene was one of utter carnage. Men struggling in the freezing water, drowning under the weight of their equipment, or being cut down by Soviet machine guns and T-34 tanks that had finally found firm ground on the opposite bank. This final bottleneck earned the river the grim German nickname, the River of Blood. General Stemmermann, the Corps commander, was killed by Soviet artillery fire during this decisive moment, highlighting the chaos and danger of the final push. The Gniloy Tikich became the final accounting, where the price of the failed strategy was paid in thousands of lives and drowned bodies. Despite the overwhelming Soviet pressure and the deadly river trap, a significant portion of the trapped force managed to break through. The veterans of the Viking Division and the Wallonian Brigade, fighting with the grim determination of men fighting for their lives, launched a final, desperate charge, often hand-to-hand, against the Soviet lines near Lysyanka. The relief forces from the 3rd Panzer Corps, aware of the carnage, pushed forward with maximum effort, finally managing to meet the exhausted, ragged remnants of the Kessel troops. The sight of the survivors was shocking. Covered head to toe in mud, Schlamm, utterly exhausted, many having thrown away their rifles, but having saved their personal dignity. The breakout was a costly success, a strategic retreat achieved only by infantry sheer will. The human cost was catastrophic. Of the 60,000 men encircled, estimates vary, but approximately 35,000 to 45,000 men successfully reached the German lines. The losses were devastating, with 15,000 to 20,000 men killed, wounded, or captured. Critically, virtually all heavy equipment, tanks, artillery, and vehicles, the entire fighting capacity of 2 corps, was permanently lost to the Red Army. The Korsun-Cherkassy Cauldron was a military defeat, a logistical catastrophe, but a tactical success in terms of saving human lives from total annihilation. It was a retreat fought and paid for in mud and blood, solidifying the grim reputation of the Eastern Front as the ultimate test of survival. The Korsun-Cherkassy Cauldron holds a unique, bitter place in the history of the Eastern Front. For the Soviet Union, it was a major victory, the elimination of 2 German corps' worth of materiel and a demonstration of superior operational art, confirming the strategic momentum gained at Stalingrad and Kursk. For Germany, it was a microcosm of their inevitable defeat. Brilliant tactical fighting was undermined by disastrous strategic decisions from Hitler. The battle proved that even the most disciplined veteran troops could not overcome the forces of nature, the Rasputitsa, and the overwhelming industrial and manpower advantage of the Soviet Union when compounded by political blindness. The survivors of the Kessel would be immediately thrown back into the collapsing Eastern Front, carrying with them the indelible memory of the mud, the cold, and the river of blood. The story of Korsun-Cherkassy is not a tale of triumph, but a testament to the brutal price of survival, a breakout achieved not by genius, but by sheer, desperate will.